produce some of the most beloved movies and franchises in the world. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, Disney animated films, and so much more. These movies and series have special meaning to a lot of people. Fandoms form around them just to discuss and analyze the characters and stories. It becomes an important part of people's lives to be able to have these imaginary worlds to explore, escape, and even gain better understanding about themselves and the people around them through these stories. So the question is, why is all of that falling apart? 2023 was one of the worst non-COVID years I've ever seen at the box office. Very few of the big tentpole films seem to be working anymore. Star Wars, Disney Animation, Pixar, Indiana Jones, Disney in general, DC, and most recently the big behemoth of them all, Marvel. What's happening here? Why are people no longer interested in these major franchise films? Seriously, I've never seen so many major franchises and brands collapse at once. And are people just not interested in the movies anymore as so many original films struggle to find an audience? What's really happening? To understand why, we have to go back to why there are so many franchises active and being revived left and right to begin with. It's because for the duration of the 2010s until now, the franchise is all Hollywood has been invested in. It brimmed up during the 2000s after a slew of independent films in the 1990s. Blockbusters had been struggling for a bit, but they came back with a vengeance with the Star Wars prequels, Spider-Man, Lord of the Rings, Dark Knight, and Pirates of the Caribbean films all becoming major successes. Later, the invention of the MCU would become the most popular movie series that the industry could offer, with the Avengers becoming the third highest grossing film ever at the time of its release. With that, the rise of the billion-dollar franchise, we saw Hollywood quickly move away from the smaller films and the more original films to focus on where the big bucks were. All of a sudden, the 2010s were filled and defined by films that were spun off from major pre-established IPs. Superhero films from both Marvel and DC, the second Star Wars revival, live-action remakes of iconic Disney animated films, sequels to major Disney Pixar animated films, many of which had been left to stand alone for years. The attempted revival of iconic monster movies, on and on and on. And this is the first key to understanding why so many franchises have fallen. It's because so many of them were brought back to life and used at once. This has been something that's been pointed out to and criticized by many people in the industry. In fact, pretty much every auteur director and former blockbuster director have criticized this, coming down especially hard on superhero films, namely Marvel. Though I do think that the criticism levied at Marvel is a bit unfair. What these directors tend to actually be upset about is that the way that the rise of the superhero film, or more accurately the franchise film, created a new studio culture where they couldn't get their films greenlit. Even MCU star Anthony Mackie has criticized the new franchise culture of Hollywood. He implies that the rise of the superhero film and the death of the movie star is a chief cause of the lack of originality in movies, and that makes a lot of sense. Filmmaking is expensive and risky, and studio executives seem like they always want to have assurance that a film will make its money back. They used to get that assurance from having a big star attached, because back in the day, stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Cruise, Jim Carrey, Julia Roberts, and so on were the big draw at the box office. They were the reason why you would go see a movie. Therefore, if you were just to get that big name actor on board, it would give it financial security, and I think that that's why more original films used to be released. The actor would be your financial security. But with the rise of social media, the allure of the movie star has faded away, which is why, coinciding with that, you can see Hollywood executives switching to something else to find that financial security, the big brand name. And from a purely business perspective, why wouldn't they? I remember looking at the box office charts when the Avengers came out, and it was only one of 3 movies to have over $1 billion at the time. Now, after a decade of franchise films, something like over 53 films have over $1 billion. The system has been working, and if you're a business person who is motivated by making as much money as possible, then why fix what isn't broken? But now it is broken. Because as much as there are those who bemoan mainstream audiences for loving superhero films and Star Wars films and whatnot, we haven't been happy with how these films have been either. Because don't get me wrong, I would love to see more original films and standalone films too, but that doesn't mean that I don't also love franchise films. In fact, there's no reason why a movie can't be incredibly well done with characters you connect with, interesting storytelling, emotional moments, and creativity just because it's a part of a franchise. The same goes for if a movie is a sequel or a remake. There is absolutely no reason why it can't be well written or well made. Good writers, directors, and creatives can make any story work. And that's the real problem with these franchise movies as of late. They haven't had any of that. This is an extremely simplistic observation to make, I know, and it's been one that's been contested by mainstream journalists. It can't be bad quality that's pushing people away from these films. It must be just franchise fatigue, even though they've been claiming that for years, even as those franchises were still racking up billions of dollars. I have a strong case to make, though. let's start with the easiest examples, the Disney remakes. Initially, there was some interest in them both out of nostalgia for the original films and out of curiosity for what live action would bring to them. Over time, however, people began to realize these live action remakes were nothing more than nostalgia bait. They did nothing more than try to be pale imitations of the original films, all while failing to understand what made those original films work in the first place, and make worse creative decisions. Meanwhile, I can't say many of Disney's other endeavors for their sequel films or even original films have been very good either. Elemental was an okay film that neither its marketing or its content explored anything we haven't seen before in a Disney movie. Wish was an even bigger letdown with an underdeveloped story, terrible songs, and generic Disney characters that had nothing to stand on their own. DC, they've been making horribly unwatchable films since forever. No one trusts them anymore. Recent Indiana Jones, arguably part of the problem with that film was how much older it skewed, but having an abnormally long runtime and completely different tone than any other Indiana Jones film, and bad initial reviews likely did nothing to help the film. Marvel, their stories went from cohesive, filled with characters people liked, to incohesive with characters who were either assassinated or just not very well drawn. Star Wars, same thing. I mean, with the big flopbusters of 2023, you might want to notice that almost all of them, except maybe one, had really, really negative word of mouth around them as well. There just isn't good writing on many of these projects anymore, and it's happening for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the good creatives that still work in Hollywood might not be given enough time to work on these projects. We've heard plenty of stories of various productions from Disney crunching expectations for how soon so many projects can be finished that has deeply affected their quality. I think forcing people to come up with ideas for series that might have already run their course could also be a problem. However, in addition to this, I think we're not giving enough respect to how important the writing part of the process is. Writing is the most important part of making a film. It's the blueprint of the production. It's the guide. But as I read so much of this behind the scenes, I'm seeing it neglected for the most part. Productions going forward with incomplete scripts or no scripts, no plan for this series of movies, a fix-it-and-post attitude requiring lots and lots of expensive reshoots just to patch up these movies. But while bad business practices can be used to explain away some of this, I think that also we might just not be hiring people who are very good at the craft of writing. Or maybe in some cases we're just not hiring people who are right for these specific franchises if they don't actually have an interest in them. To reiterate, remember the only kinds of films that studios really want to throw their money behind are the franchise films. That means that those are most likely the only movies creatives can work on at all if they want to make money, and this is the key, if they want to get their stories told. I believe this has led to a major co-opting of franchises. But we would have no evidence to believe that, would we? That creatives are using major franchises as fronts to get their own stories told? I mean, it quite literally has happened. Todd Phillips' Joker from 2019 is the greatest example of this. The movie was supposed to be an artful, adult, Oscar bait film about society's neglect for the mentally ill. Todd Phillips couldn't get the film greenlit, so he co-opted it with a major mainstream character name that would sell, and it did. To Todd Phillips' credit though, this is probably the only time I've seen someone co-opt a character or story and have it actually turn out good. But does this instance mean that co-opting franchises has happened elsewhere? Absolutely. One of the most controversial shows to come out in recent memory was Velma. It was a very, very not safe for work reboot of Scooby-Doo, centering around Velma Dinkley, of course, but apart from the names, it had absolutely nothing to do with the children's property that it was based on. If you're wondering how this show got made though, well, it is a part of a small trend of taking pre-existing PG properties and reworking them into cheap adult comedy, but there's been a lot of speculation that this was meant to be a show about its producer and voice actor Mindy Kaling, that she couldn't get greenlit, so she co-opted a notable IP like Scooby-Doo in order to put it out there. I mean, the lead character does look just like her. Sometimes this might happen because somebody is trying to get their own story off the ground. Other times, this might be the director or writer trying to mold a property into something for themselves, period. I think that this is what happened with Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi, where he tore down everything in Star Wars that had come before, and he also tore down his own story.
The legacy of the Jedi is failure. Hypocrisy, hubris.
Sacred Jedi text!
Meanwhile, we know someone like Taika Waititi had no interest in working on a character like Thor. In fact, he found the character embarrassing, and it showed in his work, and it's something that pushed people away from his film and where it had taken that character. In fact, this is a common denominator I see in most of the fallen franchises. They are not only badly made with poor storytelling of their own, but they go a step further in tearing down core things that made people love these films in the first place. That's why I think it's funny that people have thrown all of their criticism with the current film industry at Marvel. The entire reason why Marvel gets all the blame for the current movie climate is it was the biggest series of them all that lasted the longest. But the reason that it was because the MCU managed to go the longest without a major assassination of its characters or story, or a film so bad it turned everyone off forever. Many of the original MCU films were amazing and groundbreaking for their genre. That's how it got so popular. The worst of their films would just be kind of mediocre and forgettable. It wasn't until after Endgame the bad writing bug finally caught up with Marvel too, and we started getting those character assassinations and scripts so bad they killed the illusion of that world. It's ironic that so many of these massive companies got a hold of these huge brand names with the hopes of making big money off of them, but then worked with so many creatives that didn't actually have a love or understanding of them to continue to put out good productions to make that money. And all of this, creatives not understanding or caring about the projects, not having the skill to create them, or not being given enough time to come up with good ideas for them if they do have the skills, is all connected to the bad writing and bad quality that we see in these franchises and brands lately. What makes it even worse though is it's a vicious cycle. You'd think the failure or even underperformance of these various films would cause studios to halt projects and reflect on what's going wrong before course correcting. But no, up to this point it's always resulted in studio execs announcing even more sequels, remakes, and franchise films, because once again, that's all they have confidence in. If they get a bad financial report to show investors, they immediately want to compensate by showing they have surefire moneymakers on the horizon, like Toy Story 5, Frozen 6, Moana remake, etc. So even though so many people feel turned off from these bad movies and TV series spun off of once beloved properties, there always has to be more and more and more. And since the central problem of quality hasn't been fixed, that means more bad shows and movies that only continue to alienate people and make them feel apathetic for these much hype properties until everything has been run into the ground, which is where I feel we are now. So people in the industry aren't happy with there only being franchise films. Meanwhile, fans aren't happy with the franchises. So where do we go from here? Is the answer to start making original films again? That certainly might solve some of the problems. Of course, many would say that it's just impossible to get people to go to the theater and pay to watch an original film these days. After all, such brilliant films like Migration have been bombing at the box office. I mean,
can we land? You're old enough to do it in the sky now. We have a number 2 situation.
People won't go see that. What will they go see? Sarcasm aside, I don't agree with the notion that it's impossible to get people to see original films. And I have an analogy to explain what I mean. If you've heard of the kids' cartoon show Arthur, you're probably a 90s kid, or 2000s. But there's a great episode in there about how Arthur's best friend Buster has to write a book report, but he can't for the life of him finish reading a book. Arthur and his friends keep giving Buster books they think will be easier and easier for him to read, just to get him to finish one, even giving him toddler books with barely any words. But Buster still loses his attention and can't finish any of them. Then Buster all of a sudden finds Robin Hood, a book longer than any of the books his friends had offered him, and he finishes reading it in one night. This is actually a really smart episode of TV. It shows that for a lot of people, it's not necessarily that they don't like reading, they just have to find the right story that interests them. I think the same can be said for movies. I've heard people declare that little kids don't want to watch movies anymore, they just want to watch YouTube, yet a movie like Encanto will be a major hit on Disney+, rewatched by kids over and over again. They say people just don't want to go to the theater anymore, and then Top Gun Maverick will come out. And I've heard people in real life say that when Maverick came out on physical media, that as amazing as the film is, it was just not the same as experiencing it in the theater. The theater experience can still be alive, so it's worth asking the question, is Hollywood even creating the kinds of films that people actually want to see? This year, a movie called The Creator was released, and I was so looking forward to this movie as an original sci-fi film. I was hoping that I'd come away from this film hyped and ready to recommend it to everyone, but then I watched the film, and I was so disappointed. I couldn't recommend it to anyone. The characters and relationships for all the emotional beats they tried to convey were woefully underdeveloped. The idea the film presents, what if AI was the good guy? What if we created AI and they were morally superior to us, is also not developed or argued for at all during the film, beyond the mere presentation of the idea on a superficial level. I felt no emotional connection to anything that was happening, therefore I wound up being bored by the film. It's a far cry from what James Cameron did with his characters and ideas in The Terminator back in the 80s. I've gotten to see so many movies this past year with my movie pass, and I gotta tell you, most of them, actually, the grand majority of them were terrible. Streaming is used as an excuse for people's disinterest in theaters, but that doesn't really ring true to me. Streaming services themselves have been struggling for the past years, and there's a bit of a misunderstanding that if a person waits for something on streaming, then that means that they like it. No, when a person waits for something to come out on streaming, that means that they weren't interested enough in it to go see it in the theater, so they're gonna wait until they feel like they're getting it for free. I'll ask the question again, are we actually making movies that people want to see? But what about XYZ independent art film that no one saw. This is an argument I see from film students and film nerds a lot. The fact that indie art films that they think are incredible aren't widely watched is evidence that no one watches non-franchise films anymore. Guys, no one was ever putting big bucks up to watch these kinds of films. There's a reason why they are called niche. Martin Scorsese has never been a big draw at the box office. There has always been a difference between artsy movies that are well made and movies that are both well made and appealing to the mainstream audience. And that's what I'm arguing here, is that I don't see many films being released and marketed that are the latter. Listen, I like to watch more artistic niche movies myself, but I can also recognize the difference between something that appeals to me and something that appeals to the wider audience. But it isn't as if there aren't some indie creators out there who do make movies that could have broader mainstream appeal. But these filmmakers have a different problem. Filmmaking is expensive, yes, but marketing is also exponentially expensive. Getting broad distribution for your film is hard. This is something that was touched on by actor Stellan Skarsgård, who gave probably the best response of all to the criticism around superhero movies destroying the movie business. He does not believe that superhero films are the problem, but rather the new studio system these days. He points to the fact that small indie films can't put up the money for millions of dollars in marketing. There's no real channel for mid-budget films to get released anymore. Indie films that might have wider appeal can't get the distribution and advertising so that enough people know about them. That's why we so rarely see new films from new filmmakers catch on these days.
Not that it was Marvel's fault, because it's not, and he knows that. It's not Netflix's fault either that the streaming services are taking over so much. Because what has happened is that all the different small distribution companies, all the different cinema companies have been erased. It's monopoly everywhere. And they're not, cinemas and distribution and some film companies are not anymore run of people that want to make money specifically out of film because they like film. They're run by big corporations that want to have 10% back on their invested capital, which means that as long as they sell popcorn, it's fine. That's why all the mid-range films, the films that are lower than $100 million in budget and over $3 million in budget, they don't exist anymore. It's only $100 million films and $3 million films, and nothing in between. And those films were the films that slowly could grow in the cinema. They opened in a few cinemas, and then after people talked about them, and they grew and they grew and they went for years. It is this that is the course of the reason we don't have those films anymore. And that's really sad. That means that if you want to make an art film, you have to have a really small budget, and it will probably not be seen anywhere except in festivals.
We can see the importance of advertising, distribution, and quality of a film in the performance of Godzilla Minus One. It's an excellent film, probably the best film to come out in 2023, and because of great word of mouth, it became the highest grossing live-action Japanese film in the US. However, it still only grossed $85 million all in all, and it had the potential to get even more because it does star a widely recognized icon. But being a foreign film meant it couldn't get the advertising to raise even more awareness in the US. With that, I honestly feel that there are only 3 kinds of movies that get released these days: niche art films, fallen franchise films, and Christopher Nolan films. Yes, Christopher Nolan seems to be the last filmmaker working today who can not only get a non-franchise film made and widely released, but also deliver at the box office. And why wouldn't he? His films are marketed like exciting events. He's proven time and time again that he has a certain style of directing that clicks with a lot of people. And he makes good films. This is what directors like Steven Spielberg, James Cameron, George Lucas, and others used to have in their prime. They could not only make an exceptionally well-made film, but they had the understanding and ability to make something that connected with the mainstream audience. But we almost never get that anymore. To be fair though, Nolan's Oppenheimer was helped a bit by the sensation around the first Barbie movie, which filled out a gap in the market of truly feminine movies aimed at women, with a marketing campaign akin to the pink overload a 6-year-old girl would feel in the Barbie toy aisle as a kid. Regardless of what you think of the final film, the marketing worked and drove it to be the highest grossing film of 2023. But I also think that the excitement over Nolan's newest film helped Barbie. Which is to say, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a budget budget to market a film, then you must market it well. I saw multiple trailers for films last year that looked absolutely awful. And then the movie would come out and someone would say, hey, this is actually a great movie. Why did no one see it? People must just not want to go see the movies anymore. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't have known that this movie was good because the marketing made it look absolutely terrible. So having a good quality film that was going to be enticing to people is one thing, but you must make sure to market it well. And trust me guys, if we were getting films on the level of Back to the Future, Alien, Top Gun Maverick, Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, Iron Man, Beauty and the Beast, Frozen, Tangled, Toy Story, Titanic, Jurassic Park, or Lord of the Rings, every couple of months at the theater, they were marketed well, but still no one was going to see them, then I would agree with you that no one wants to go to the theater anymore. But the fact of the matter is, we're not getting those kinds of films. So why have so many iconic Hollywood franchises fallen, and what appears to be the problem with movies in general these days? Well, I've talked about lack of quality, especially when it comes to the writing of projects from mainstream Hollywood. I've talked about how poor business practices have also hindered these projects. I've also talked about how a lot of indie films that do get released aren't for most people, and how mid-budget productions that would be are nearly extinct. But all of these problems can be condensed into one statement that explains the entire problem with the movie business and why it's currently suffering so much. Hollywood isn't producing the kinds of films that people actually want to see. They've lost their touch on how to sell an original film to the audience, to the point where they don't even try anymore. But then audiences were turned off of their much beloved franchises as the filmmakers and executives making those films turned away from what made them successful in the first place and started churning out worse and worse work. Going forward, it seems that Hollywood's solution to that might be to find new big IPs like video games to try to right the ship, but I believe that this is set up to fail with the current way the movie business is run. All of these problems are just going to continue to perpetuate. So what is the real solution going forward? Listen, I don't create these videos on all the problems with movies today because I hate movies or I just want to watch Hollywood burn. I create these videos because I love movies and I want things to get better. I want to see people excited and happy about movies again. I love good original films, but I love these franchises too. The answer is not one or the other. As Christopher Nolan recently said in an interview, a healthy film ecosystem has both the big franchise films and the smaller original films too. So the solution to correct the film industry is actually quite simple. We need to hire people willing to get in touch with the audience. Understand what they actually want to see today. We need to give chances to new creatives who can create well-written, well-directed movies that also appeal to wide audiences. Instead of shaming people for liking superhero movies or Star Wars, ask questions as to why those properties connected with people so potently in the first place. Maybe you'll find it was nothing of substance, like with the Disney remakes, but I guarantee most of the time, I think you'll find that there was really something to these movies. Ask questions about why the work of people like Christopher Nolan still draws people in, or Top Gun Maverick, how that really electrified audiences. In their prime, what about the work of Steven Spielberg and James Cameron brought people to their movies over the more niche directors? These questions are things filmmakers need to be asking themselves if they really want to keep movies alive. They are the questions I ask myself as I continue with my filmmaking and want things to be good and appeal to the widest audience possible. And the audience is not to blame if they don't see something. As artists, no one is obligated to like our work. It is our job, rather, to make these things appeal to people. Make them feel as if they've actually been given something. And it's important for anyone going into the business to train themselves on how to entice audiences with either kind of film. Because if you don't have the ability to sell an original film to an audience, then how can you expect to sell a franchise film? So can we get to a point where we're actually making good films that people want to see again? History says yes. Disney went through a horrible dark age where the animation studio nearly went out of business before they came out with The Little Mermaid and ushered in the greatest era of animation they ever had. It's entirely possible to come into a better age of filmmaking where we can allow more kinds of films to be made and also revive some of the poor pilfered franchises. There's no reason why good writing and marketing can't be introduced to any of this. As for the problem with distribution channels, I'm a blind optimist. Yes, in some ways today we have fewer options for distribution than ever, but in other ways we have more than ever. I'm a believer that we can find ways to get good films out to people.
Life, finds a way.
However, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't getting a little bit worried, especially when I see more of the same creatives that worked on these failed films being hired again and again for more projects, and the same bad business practices perpetuate. The studio heads say they want change, but actions speak louder than words. We need to actually see change. But hearing some people behind the scenes that actually get it gives me hope.
Audiences don't like being told you should see this or you should see that. They will decide and they will generate the interest themselves.
We need to make sure that we elevate these creatives, because I'm getting concerned that my little theater doesn't have much longer. And movies aren't a medium that I ever want to see fall like that. To me, movies are the best medium of art ever. It's where every form of art meets. Writing, acting, drawing, painting, set design, music, to create the most immersive storytelling experience imaginable. None of that should be let down like this. But it will continue to be, unless there are people out there who are still willing to get in touch with the audience. Thank you all for watching this video, and thank you patrons for supporting my channel. If you would like to support my channel, then there is a link to my Patreon below, and you get exclusive behind the scenes content there. And as I mentioned in this video, I'm also a filmmaker, so please be sure to like and subscribe to this video to see my next upcoming short film. In the meantime, feel free to check out my short films I've already made and watch more videos, and I will have more great videos coming out in the future, and I will see you guys next time.